Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I need to start by saying I am not the Frank White that played for the Kansas City Royals. I get asked that all the time, and while I know Frank, and I got some wonderful stories about that, but we don't have time tonight to tell you those, but they're hilarious. So, all right. Well, let me begin. Let me see. I never really wanted to do a book. I started out with Ramsey County. They talked me into doing an exhibit. I did that. Then they talked me into doing an article for their quarterly magazine. I did that. And then John Lindley said, okay, the next thing is a book. And I said, I'm not doing a book. Well, my wife and some others said, if you don't tell these stories, they'll be gone forever.
That's right.
Fortunately, I've been able to interview and be with my father and interview some of his teammates after he passed away and before they passed away to collect some of these stories. Everything that I have about this history and manuscript didn't make it into the book, so there is a lot more, but I'm going to share some of the story tonight and I can answer any questions to the best of my ability. So Black Baseball Minnesota, we never had a Negro League team in Minnesota. Asterisk. We had one that played like 2 games. They went on the road and never came back. So I don't even mention them because we never had one. So all of this are these players are people that played here in Minnesota, never had an opportunity to play for a Negro League team. I'm not exactly sure why, other than maybe money, and then travel, because we would have been on the far edge of what was the Negro National League when it started. So I'm sure that had an impact too. Dave Winfield, who was like my brother, did the foreword to the book. So he made a couple comments in there. So let me tell you kind of like the beginning of this. My father really, as I used to travel and watch him play, he never really talked about his journey. I was standing at an event at the History Center one time where they invited some people in, and it was named Discover Greatness back in '98. And these gentlemen were the people that were being featured there. So in the back row, on your left is Leroy Hardeman. My father is in the middle. On the right, on your right, on the far right in the back row is Harry Davis, the civil rights gentleman from Minneapolis. In the front row, on the left, seated, is Jim Griffin, who ends up going on to be the deputy police chief in St. Paul. The gentleman in the middle is a gentleman named, I think, Red Evans. I think Red is not his real name, but that was his nickname. I do know the name was Evans. And then on the far right seated is Larry Bubba Brown. Some of these nicknames in fact, my father's nickname was Pud, P-U-D, P-U-D. And I found out later on that it was short for Putty Pie. So I'm standing watching this event and these gentlemen talking, and they're talking about baseball and Negro League teams coming through. And the gentleman standing next to me is a guy named Jim Robinson. And he says, those guys when those teams used to come barnstorming through here, they used to come and get your dad to play. I said, who? He said, those Negro League teams. I was like, wait a minute, say that again? So on the drive home, I look at my father and I said, Dad, Jim tells me that these teams used to come and get you to play. How come you've never told me? He said, oh, that stuff's not important. Sounds like my dad. So anyway, that was kind of a beginning in the back of my head. I thought, man, my dad played with some of these Negro League teams. There were some great players in the Negro Leagues. We'll talk about that in a bit. So anyway, that was the beginning, but it really wasn't. I've always liked history. I'm one of those people, when I used to travel with my father, we'd go through a town or come to a town, and I'd always wonder, why here? Why did somebody make a town here? So I've always loved history. Anytime I've traveled, I usually drive, and whenever I see one of those brown signs, I usually pull off the road. So I love history. Change. One of the great unknown players, I was talking about this gentleman a little bit ago, is a guy named Billy Williams. Billy is in the middle of the back row. I can't see this. I think it's like 1898 or something like that, and so 1893. So those were a couple teams that he played for way back when. And in 1905, he ended up being hired by the new Governor Johnson, as the state capitol opens up. So he was in a dilemma. He also got offered to play for the Orioles, which I think at the time was a minor league team. Everybody was trying to be a major league, minor league, baseball was everything. So Billy, they said, if you come and play with us, that would be great, but you have to say you're native or Indian at the time. And Billy said, nah, I'm not doing that. I'm proud of who I am, so I'm not gonna do that. So he didn't sign, but that was one of his goals. He wanted, like many people, wanted to play professional baseball. He doesn't, so he goes on to work for Governor Johnson, and then he goes on to work for 14 consecutive governors. He's the longest full-service employee in state capitol history, 52 years. Or it might even be 53. I may have made a mistake on this. But think about the impact of what this guy had. Every day you're talking to the governor. So he wasn't the assistant governor, he was an assistant to the governor. Some statements say he was the messenger. Whatever the case is, you had to see Billy before you got to see the governor. So think of the impact that he could have had, and he was well known all over Minnesota because of his baseball success. So this is one of the stories of a player that I didn't even know about until I started researching. And I'm working with the Capitol right now, the History Center. Again, there is a portrait of him that was done at his retirement, and it's at the History Center right now in storage. I'm trying to get that permanently displayed in the Capitol in the area where his desk was, which is the entryway into the governor's reception area. So, and the Twins, we honored Billy here, I think about 2 years ago. Every year we honor somebody different at a Saints game, and Billy was one of those individuals. Change. One of the, see that cap they got on? One of the greatest baseball teams in Minnesota was the St. Paul Gophers, sometimes referred to as the St. Paul Colored Gophers. Phil Reed, the gentleman in the middle with the, I don't know if you call that a derby, a bolo, or whatever, he was the owner of a tavern down on 3rd and Cedar, today Kellogg and Cedar. And it would have been on the riverside, right there. It sloped down. It doesn't do that anymore because it's been flattened out and built up. But I have a picture of where that was. He wanted to have the best, back in those days it was called, I want to have the fastest baseball team in the Midwest. Fastest meaning the best. He sent a gentleman named Walter Ball, who was a great baseball player and played in Minnesota, to Chicago to recruit the best players he could. That was in I think December of 1906. So in 1907, he comes up with this team, and the players are all from Chicago. That's interesting to me. Let me give you another trivia thing about that exchange. So the St. Paul Saints, at the turn of the 20th century, was owned by a gentleman named Comiskey. He decided he wanted to play in a major league, so he moved his team from St. Paul to Chicago. And they became the White Sox. One day One day I'm at home and Mike Max calls me and says, "Hey Frank, we're rained out here in Chicago." He said, "Can we talk a little bit of baseball while we're waiting?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Yeah." He said, "We're the White Sox." I said, "No, you mean the St. Paul Saints." He said, No, Frank, the White Sox." I said, "Mike, we're talking about the St. Paul Saints." He said, "Okay, Frank, tell me, what's the deal?" So I told him that story, okay? Interesting. So the Gophers come from Chicago, the Saints go to Chicago, so we had an exchange. Different time period. This team played everybody, anybody, including the St. Paul Saints. Unfortunately, they lost both of those games when they played them in 1907. But to give you an idea, like this game here is up in Hibbing, and you can't really see the scoreboard, but the Gophers won this game 17-2. So they were a draw no matter where they went, because back then people were trying to make money, right? Small towns were trying to bring in people so they could make money. And so the Gophers were one of those draws. People would write to them. I have a couple of letters where people are saying, "What are your terms to come and play here?" So let me give you their record. In 1907, their one-loss record was 86-17-2.
Oh gosh.
Or 828. In 1908, they were 97-26-1, or 754. In 1909, they were 75-27-3, or 728. They also played a 5-game series with a team called the Leland Giants out of Chicago, which was the black team in the country. So the Gophers beat them 3 out of 5. Because of that, they were proclaimed the Black National Champions. Proclaimed. So when they were proclaimed that, there was feedback from around the country of other teams saying, "Well, they didn't play us," and that type of thing. So, but you can't undo what's already in the papers. So the next year in 1910, they lost back to the Chicago team 4-1. So Chicago reclaimed their title or whatever. But again, I mention those things because, like today, you look at the Twins, and if we said if they're 500, they're okay, or any team saying 500. But you have teams that winning 8 out of 10 ball games and playing everybody. They had to be a pretty good team, and they were. So we can go change now. The Uptown Sanitary Shop was a place in downtown St. Paul owned by a gentleman named Owen Howe, and they also sponsored a baseball team in the 20s. That team in the 20s was probably the best black baseball team in Minnesota. Now the Gophers, there was a team that was started in Minneapolis called the Minneapolis Keystone Tigers, started by a gentleman named Kid Mitchell. And he did that intentionally because he wanted to make money, like everybody, and he wanted to rival the Gophers. There was this rivalry back and forth. There was always supposed to be a game and a playoff and Kid Mitchell always turned it down. And finally, when he did, the Gophers won. So the next time they were supposed to play, he canceled again. And then in the 20s, there was a team in Minneapolis called the Askin Marine Red Sox. And then in St. Paul, it was the Uptown Sanitary Shop team. And again, the St. Paul team did much better than the Minneapolis team. Anybody from Minneapolis? Good. So again, St. Paul was ahead in those early years, at least in black baseball teams. So here's the Uptown Sanitary Shop team, and here's a photo that is at the History Center. And when I first saw this picture, I could only identify one person, and it's Bobby Mitchell, and we're going to get to that because with some clicks, we're going to do that. But then, then later, I was at a funeral for one of my father's teammates, and a young lady said, Frank, I have a picture of a team in the 20s, and I want to show it to you. And I got all excited, and I got there, and I saw the picture, and I was like, I already saw that picture. However, there were some lines drawn with some names attached. And I said, where did you get those names? And her grandmother's name, they called her Mama Ducey. And that's also the grandmother of one of my best friends, Roger Neal, who we played midget baseball together at the Ober Boys Club back in 1956. We're still friends today. So let's do some clicks here with some names. If you click, I'm sorry. So there's Bobby Marshall. If you click again, his name will pop up. That's John Davis. There was a John Davis that played for the St. Paul Gophers, but it was a different John Davis. Dennis Ware, George White.
Is that your dad?
No, I'll come to that story in a second. And then Lewis House and Jimmy Lee. How many people know the Jimmy Lee Recreation Center?
Of course.
So in this story, we're going to go to the, so I've been able to identify these players. So I have sent an updated version, this slide right here, to the History Center so they can update their records. Also down in the lower right-hand corner is the name Rhodes. I also know that this photo was taken by a gentleman named Arthur Rhodes, who was a photographer at the time. So, and is from the Rondo neighborhood. So we can go to the next slide. So when my book first came out, I was going to libraries around, and I was in Burnsville. And before I get started, the gentleman walked up to me. He said, "Can I show you something?" And I said, "Sure." So he pulled out of this plastic bag a scorebook, and it was tattered. It had a hard cover, so I knew it was old right away. So he opened it up and he pointed to this page, and he said, if you look at the number 5 batter here, Dulove Lee, that's Jimmy Lee, Dulove Hogan, I forgot Mays, Roach was the pitcher, and the white here is George White. So he pointed at that and he said, "Is that your father?" And I said, and I looked up in that upper right-hand corner, and the game was May 29th, 1927. I said, "Oh, that can't be my father, because my father was born February 29th, 1928. So I know that's not my dad." So I'm doing this talk, and all of a sudden comes to me, "Oh, wait a minute, that's my dad's coach. That's George." So I blurted out, "George White." And everybody looked at me like, "What?" Because it just came, it just came into my head. So I told him, "I need to talk to you afterwards. So this gentleman, again, I said, can I see the rest of the scorebook? In the scorebook, there are 8 games where his father's team, Oxborough from Bloomington area, played the Uptown Sanitary Shop team or a team from Minneapolis. His father owned all of the land that Met Center was built on. His father loved baseball, and he loved working the soil. So when he sold the land at the time, all of the people that they were coming to start working on the field, they hadn't paid him yet. So he met them with a shotgun. And the interesting thing is, I remember that being on TV. And I said, Dad, what's that all about? He said, oh, they'll get all that worked out. So they called the son in to come and help straighten it out. They got a contract started. And then the rest is history, right? So the Twins and the Vikings hired his father to be the groundskeeper.
Oh.
So this guy grew up going to any game that he wanted to go. In fact, he said, I stopped going to games because I didn't want to go anymore. Interesting. So anyway, this is one of the score pages, again, that really, I mean, each of these score pages is history by itself. He let me take the scorebook. I had it for over a year. And I kept calling him and saying, I need to get this back to you. He said, oh, we're going to be out of town for a while. I'll get it from you. So one day I put it in the trunk because I thought I was going to see him the next day. And for some reason, I pulled it back out. It was in a plastic bag. And I forgot I pulled it out. I went to the car wash, got my car washed. When I got back home, I opened up the trunk thinking I was going to see the scorebook. It wasn't there. I panicked. And then I remembered, oh, it's in the house. So I called him up and I said, look, I gotta get this thing out to you. And a couple of days later, I drove it out to his house. He lived out by the ski area out there. Is it, what's the Buck Hill or what, Burnsville or whatever? What is it?
Buck Hill.
Buck Hill, yeah. So anyway, I would love to have kept this thing, but it was his, and it was a great piece of history for his father. So, and I just tried to call him recently, and he didn't answer. So I hope he's still alive because I'd really like to meet up with him again and talk a little bit more. So I have about eight of these score pages like this that I've had to update a little bit so you could see them better. But each one, again, is a piece of history by itself. So this is Phyllis Wheatley in Minneapolis, the original Phyllis Wheatley. If you notice, on the second floor, there's a bunch of windows. Upstairs at Phyllis Wheatley, they had, I want to say, 13, 14 sleeping rooms. And the reason they had those sleeping rooms was that whenever entertainers, politicians, special individuals that came to Minneapolis, sometimes students at the University of Minnesota, would have a place to stay. Because you couldn't stay in a hotel in downtown Minneapolis. You couldn't stay in the St. Paul Hotel at that time. So this picture to me is very special. I also used to go play basketball over there and beat up on the Minneapolis guys. Or at least that's my version. But that's the original one. This gentleman, John Walton, was the first black student at Cretin High School. He wanted to be a baseball player. If you see his activities when he played, and it says ambition to play baseball. He actually did play for the Chicago American Giants. Then he moved out to San Francisco and played for a team called the San Francisco Sea Lions, which was a team in the Pacific Coast League, which was an all-black league. I went to Cretin, and I have a couple team pictures with him in it. This picture is one of the pictures they have up all over Cretin where they have all of the students. But in his years, in his graduation year, they don't have this picture up there. So I'm working with them to get that corrected. I was like, why wouldn't you have his picture up there? I hope it's not the obvious reason. So anyway, here was a great guy. I did contact this gentleman's son, and he sent me a contract when he got traded or sold to another team, the San Diego Apostles or something like that, in the same league after he played with the San Francisco Sea Lions. So, Tony Stone. In the city of St. Paul, there's a field called Tony Stone Field at the Dunning Athletic Complex. When I first saw the sign, they had the name spelled Tony. I said, you know what, if you're gonna do this, let's get it correct. So they changed it. Then I found out that in St. Paul's Park and Rec Department, under facilities, they were still calling the field Dunning Field, and so was the school district. So I contacted both the school district and the city and said, look, if this would have been called George Washington Field, you would have changed the name on your facilities and on the schedules. So they changed it. So now they do refer to it as Tony Stone Field. If you can see, oops, go back, please. So in this box score here, when people talk about back in those days, baseball wasn't very good and teams used to play against the farmers or whatever, and I don't mean that as a slight, but that's, people are like, oh, they weren't really baseball players. So here's a box score that shows Tony Stone. Her name is referred to as Tomboy Stone because that's what they called her. But then if you look at the Connerville's team, the number 3 batter that name is Pafko. The name is Andy Pafko. So for any of you baseball fans that remember the shot heard around the world, the Giants beat the Dodgers, right? 1951, October either 2nd or 3rd, same day Dave Winfield was born. The left fielder for the Dodgers in that ball game was Andy Pafko. So in Wisconsin and Minnesota, we had good baseball players. We still do today, even though the rest of the country doesn't think so. I'm also working on a project of Tony Stone. I'm not sure how familiar you are with St. Paul, but between Dale Street and McCubbin, Carroll Avenue no longer exists. There is a school there called Benjamin Mays. It's actually 2 schools, Benjamin Mays and Capitol Hill. Tony Stone lived at 551 Carroll before she moved to California, and her parents continued to live there. That address, 551 Carroll, would be in the lobby area of Benjamin Mays School. So I have a map that has the school outlined. There are 2 signs being printed right now. One has her face on and a story, and then the other has the map showing again one of the Sanford maps, which shows some of the houses that are no longer there. So it's going to be interesting, and I'm going to say to the kids as we do a celebration, I'm going to say, when you're running through the hallways here, you have to be careful because you might be running through her bedroom. So So that's another little project that we're gonna honor Tony Stone with.
Are there any other African-American girls playing baseball?
Yeah, we had some young ladies that played softball a little bit after Tony, and then Tony goes on. I forgot to tell this part of the story. So Tony ends up playing here. She moves to San Francisco. She plays for the San Francisco Sea Lions. Then she ends up playing for the New Orleans Creoles, and then she gets signed by the Indianapolis Clowns in 1953. So she is the first woman to play in the Negro Leagues or in Major League Baseball today, right? Because they now have adopted some of the Negro League stats into Major League stats. So she becomes that. There were two other women that were signed by the Clowns after her, Peanut Johnson and I can never remember the other lady's name. So I will share with you this. Do any of you remember the name of a council member or a police officer named Debbie Montgomery?
Of course.
Debbie Montgomery and I are the same age, a couple months apart. When we played ball as kids, Debbie would be picked before a lot of the boys were picked. Debbie was a great athlete. She also won speed skating at Como Park Lake when they used to do the winter carnival stuff or whatever. So she won, and I can't remember the person that she beat. Peggy Cass or something like that, maybe. Anyway, she beats her. That woman goes on to the Olympics, but Debbie doesn't because of the color of her skin. But Debbie was an outstanding athlete ahead of her time here in St. Paul because that would have been in the 50s. They didn't start girls' sports here until 1976 with high schools, 75 and 76. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Next slide. Okay, so this quote was in the newspaper, and this wasn't the only one, but this was done by a St. Paul City Council member in his bid for re-election.
Did he win that bid for reelection?
I don't think he won.
Oh, good.
But when I saw this, I was like, holy cow. This is like right out there in the paper, so kind of very demeaning. So you can go to the next slide. This gentleman, Harold Babe Price, was a great pitcher. Played for the Twin City Colored Giants. The catcher that he played with most of the time was a gentleman named Lewis Pood White, my father. The Twin City Colored Giants used to travel all over, and they would travel up to Canada and play. And so if you look at this box score here, I think it says he has something like 17 strikeouts or something like that in this game. I can't see it from here. How many?
I see 22.
I'm sorry, 22. Thank you.
What year is this?
This would have been like 1950, 51. And so if you look down below, I think it's an extra inning game, right?
It's 11 innings.
So 11 innings, 3 outs, 33 outs, 22 strikeouts.
It's 2/3.
So Babe, when they go up to Canada, him and another gentleman, Solomon Drake, who ends up being signed by the Cubs. Well, they were both signed by the Elmwood Giants up in Canada. And then Solomon Drake was signed by the Cubs, and Babe was signed by the Dodgers. His first visit to Vero Beach for spring training, he ended up being involved in an incident, I'm told, trying to protect a woman at a bar, and he gets shot in the knee. There goes his professional career.
That's right.
So he mends and he comes back and he goes up and plays in Canada again. In Western Canadian baseball history, he is listed as one of the greatest players in Western Canada. The interesting thing is that a lot of the Negro League players, as the Negro Leagues folded beginning, in the early 50s, players would go up to Canada and play so they could continue to play baseball and make a little money. So that's Babe Price. Jimmy Lee, I won't read all of that to you. This guy is one of I could talk about Jimmy all day long. Very respectful individual and somebody that was always in the background. He never was out front. He worked at the First National Bank. Jim Griffin said, if Jimmy Lee called you by your first name in downtown St. Paul when you were coming through the bank, you had made it in downtown St. Paul. He was always talking to business people down there and getting money for programs at Oxford. He was the first African-American umpire in Big Ten baseball. This game right here, this is a regional game at Delta Field. The gentleman that's getting ready to slide is from Notre Dame. The gentleman catching the ball is from Ohio U. And looks like this guy's going to be out. But there's Jimmy. You couldn't, as an umpire, you couldn't have a better look than where he's at right there, right? The Gophers go on to win this regional tournament and then go on to win the College World Series this year. So. This is a picture taken at the Negro League Baseball Museum. When I found out, we were talking one day and somebody said that my father, when they talked about him playing with the Negro League teams, I was like, so my brother and I were down in Kansas City one time together for different reasons, but we ended up going to the museum. And I said, Dad, I'll get you something while I'm down there. We had a chance meeting with Buck O'Neil, who is in the middle there. So we're talking, and I told my brother about the story about my father playing with the teams when they were coming through the Twin Cities. So when we meet Buck O'Neil, I'm standing and I said, Mr. O'Neil, could you sign 3 pitchers or 4 pitchers, one for me and my brother and one for Steve and Dave Winfield? He said, of course. So I go back to get the pitchers. When I come back, my brother is telling him the story about my father. So Buck says, what's your dad's name? And my brother said, Lewis White. And Buck went, your dad is Lou White? So you either called my father Pud or Lou if you knew him. You didn't call him Lewis. So when he said, your dad is Lou White, I was like shocked. So he said, is he alive? And at that point in time, my father was having surgery here, which ended up being some things that were going to be terminal for him. So I'm just floored that Buck had remembered him. So my brother and I are driving back. We get back and Buck said, be sure to tell your dad hi. So I get back, my sisters, they're crying, we're at the hospital, and I said, where's Dad? And they said, well, he's in the recovery room in there, but he can't talk. So I go in and I leaned over my father, and he looks up at me and I said, Dad, Buck O'Neil said to say hi. And his eyes just got big. I was like, oh man. So later, I talked to my brother and said, you know what, we need to take Dad down to see Buck O'Neill. And this is when we did that. A couple months later, my dad was still alive, but he wasn't going to be with us much longer. And so we went down, and Buck O'Neill was so gracious to my father in talking about my father playing ball with the Monarchs and that stuff, and them actually trying to recruit him to play. But he said, you know, we were men, and he was just coming out of high school, and so he was really a kid. And his mama wasn't going to let him come travel around the country with us men.
I don't blame her.
Well, what Buck didn't know was my father graduated in 46. I was born in 45. So not only was my grandmother not going to let him go, but I don't think my mom was going to let him go either. My father won the city batting title in 1946 in St. Paul with a batting average of 600. It's still a record today. So my dad could hit. My dad, and he was a catcher, he was very good. So that's Kwame McDonald with the microphone here, who had his own sports rap show on cable TV, and then my father, and I actually was the camera guy for this, the video guy for this. I have the video on my website, and it's a great video if you had time and wanted to listen. I have some cards here somewhere, and my website, I think, is listed on there if you wanted to know more about black baseball, because everything's not here tonight, but it might answer some additional questions. But if you want, and I've got a number of videos, but I have the video with my father and Buck O'Neill, and every time I watch it, it's kind of heartbreaking for me. So that's, we can go to the next slide. This is a night at, so one of the things I did in my life, I was the coordinator for the Minnesota Twins with the RBI program, Reviving Baseball in Inner City. The guys in the back are my father's teammates, some of them teammates. The gentleman on the left with the black cap is John Cotton. Next to him with the white cap is Cecil Littles. The guy 2 people away is Ken Christian, and then on the far right is Leroy Hardiman again. The kids in front are some of our RBI kids that played baseball that year. The guy in the red shirt, well, this gentleman here and the kid in the red shirt are brothers. The youngest one, what is that, the third from the right? About 4 years ago, he was the starting point guard for St. Thomas when they won the national championship in basketball. So he switched on us. But that was okay. That was okay. I think there's some other slides, but I think they're just pictures of teams. So I'll stop right there, and then hopefully there's some questions. I also will mention if we can have some lights maybe, but we'll end right now with these pictures are just pictures of teams, and I don't really want to talk about, so to speak. I would rather answer questions or talk a little bit more. One of the things that people used to ask always was Satchel Paige. Did Satchel Paige ever play in Minnesota? And I'd always say, I don't think so. Well, I have a friend that has done research, and in 1959, Satchel Paige traveled with a team called the Havana Cuban All-Stars across the country. They played 8 times in Minnesota. So he did play here. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So, and there are some relatives that live here in St. Paul that are relatives of Satchel Paige. So they used to live across the street, but I didn't know that until much later.
So how old was he really in 1959?
How, in 1959?
How old was he really?
Oh, who knows? Who knows? But imagine, I mean, when he went back and played with Cleveland, how old was he?
I heard he was
And
50.
and he was winning ball games,
Oh, yeah.
right? He helped them win the pennant. What a tremendous arm! I mean, what a they at one point in time they said he made the most money in baseball in a year. He was always pitching, so he would pitch like 3 innings, and then he'd stop, and then he'd be on his way somewhere else to pitch for somebody else, and then Hilton Smith, who eventually would come and play for Falda. On his downside, he wasn't pitching anymore, so Pat Royce,
Uh-huh.
his father was the guy that recruited him to play in Falda, Minnesota. So Hilton Smith was a great pitcher. In fact, he got inducted the same time Kirby and David got inducted into the Hall of Fame. So we had some great players that played here. And I'll just you probably know these. So Willie Mays played here. Orlando Cepeda played here. Roy Campanella played here. Let me see. So I asked earlier, I have a prize, not you two. Who can tell me the first black pitcher in Major League Baseball?
Joe Black.
Stop it.
Dan Bankhead.
You got-
Close.
Dan
He's
Bankhead.
a Dodger.
How did you know that?
I know it. He was the first pitcher to pitch to a black batter in majors too. Hank Thompson.
He hit a home run the first time up. So Dan Bankhead. So I know you people usually say Joe Black or Don Newcomb or Satchel Paige, but Dan Bankhead was signed by the Dodgers in '48. Played and didn't do so well because he was afraid to hit one of the white batters and the consequences. So he didn't pitch as well. He got sent back here to play with the Saints. So he played with the Saints here for a short time and then went back up to play for the Dodgers. So
Did the Saints and the Millers integrate before the Dodgers, or did they have to wait for the Dodgers to integrate before Minneapolis and St. Paul's AAA teams integrated?
Roy Campanella was the person that integrated the Saints in 1948. And then there were people that after him, Ray Dandridge.
Yeah.
Ray Dandridge was a great player. In fact, the first year he played in the AAA league, he won the AAA. But DeRocher didn't want to bring him up to the Cubs because they said he was too old. Well, at that time, AAA ball was, I mean, think of how many teams there were in the major leagues. Completely different. So the AAA teams back then
They're really good.
were really good. Those guys were just waiting their turn. So they were very good. So if Ray Dandridge did that, how come he couldn't play in the major leagues? But again, it was said that it was probably an age thing. Lou Brock played here. Lou Brock played for the St. Cloud Rocks. So I didn't know that until I was up in St. Cloud one day and I saw that, I almost fell. But Cepeda, I mean, there were Willie Kirkland, so a number of players that made it into the major league. Dan Barnhill played here for the Millers. Trying to think of some of the other guys, but a number of players that ended up playing in the major leagues played here in the Twin Cities.
So what were the games like? Because I wasn't around when the Saints and the Millers played one another.
Oh, you know, that was a rivalry. You know, it could get ugly. It could get ugly for sure. So like anything else, you know, that rivalry continues today, right? St. Paul, Minneapolis, between schools and all of that type of stuff, it continues. It will forever be a rivalry. Let me tell you one story about traveling with my father. So teams barnstormed in baseball, and they would do a split of the gate, like 60-40. If you won, you got 60%. If you lost, you got 40%. So one year, at my junior year, after the basketball season, I played at Mechanic Arts. My father said, "What are you doing this weekend?" I said, "Oh, Dad, nothing." He said, "Well, you want to go play ball with us, and I'll pay you $10 a game." And I was like, Dad, I'll go, but you don't have to pay me. So I got to travel with my father and 5 guys. Now, Jim Tucker played for the Syracuse Nationals. All these guys played college ball, okay? Big, they're all big. So my dad had a station wagon. In that back seat, there was no seat. So I laid down the whole trip. So we go to 2 places in Wisconsin, and I can never remember the name of the first place, but we pulled up in front of this place. It was starting to get dusk, and I said, "Dad, what is this?" He said, "This is the gym." And I looked at it and I thought, man, it's falling down. So we go inside, and the gentleman says, "Oh, guys, got to tell you, you're not going to be able to take showers tonight because the pipes froze." And so I was like, how is that? So we take off our clothes, start warming up, and it's cold. So as people came, body heat starts filling up. Now I'm a high school kid, and these are men. So they take me to be like the 6th man to give people a little break or whatever. So I get in the game a few times. Man, I had bruises. I got beat up so much I can't even stand it. But after the game, we go over to this little restaurant bar situation. So we walk in, and there's a vestibule, and there's people standing there, and they want autographs. So somebody comes up to me and says, "Can I get your autograph?" I said, "No, get theirs, because I'm not anybody special." So I walked into the bar through the doors. And when I walked into the bar, there was a long bar here to my left, and some tables over here where you could eat, and some pool tables. So I looked up behind the bar, and there was a sign that said, "Come and see the St. Paul Nigger Clowns play basketball." And it had a caricature of a gentleman, ugly caricature, but I wish I had that sign today. I was like, so I went back out and I said, "Dad, we can't eat here." He said, "Why not?" So the guys followed me in, and I pointed to the sign. They started laughing. I thought, I don't see anything funny here, but I'm with my dad, right? So we eat, and then we go sleep, and we go to the next place. The next place, I always remember the name, Lac des Flambeaux. We pull into town, and birch trees, and you can see, and it's March, so you can see the lake behind. There's no leaves, and there's a nice little cottage restaurant-looking thing set in the trees. So my dad opens up the back, I get out, I'm stretching because I'm laying down, and I'm hungry. I'm a teenager. So I start walking up this little cobblestone walkway. There's blinds on the door. All of a sudden the blinds go shut. There's a sign that says open, and a hand comes from behind the blinds and turns it closed. By the time I get to the doorknob is locked. So I turned it and I said, "Dad," and they're all laughing. So just then a patrol car pulls up and says, "Are you guys the ball team?" My dad says, "Yeah," and they're laughing. I'm like, so the patrolman says, "Well, follow us around, follow me," and so they take us around. They took us around the lake to a resort, which was really nice. So we ate, relaxed, and then we went and played ball. When I got back home, I told my friends, "Man, listen to this." Now, I knew there was bias, but I had never encountered anything like that, okay? All of those years, I still never understood until I started doing research and listening to some of the stories of the Negro League players. They ran into the same thing, and they would have to take that if they wanted to return again to play and make money. So my dad, when we pulled up and he said, "That's the gym," they must have been there before. Okay? So I'm thinking, man, you gotta take that. I'm like, wow. But that's the way things were. So even in baseball, I didn't always travel every place with my father, but I can only imagine that that type of encounter happened other places.
What year was that?
The 50s, 50s, and I'm trying to think, so yeah, 50s to late 50s to right up until probably 60, somewhere right in there. And then they stopped, and then baseball was kind of on a decline, and so a lot of people started playing fast pitch softball, and my father did too, so yeah. Just different challenging times. I mean, I don't dwell on that stuff, but it's a piece of my growing up. It's a piece of history. And I feel bad because there are so many players, men, and even women. Sorry.
No, it's not you. It's the
Women
machine.
that never got an opportunity to try out and fail. They just couldn't even try out. So I think about that. As I grew up, it was such a different time. At least I got to try out. And if I wasn't good enough, somebody said, "Oh, sorry, next time, kid." And even my grandson right now, who is a good athlete, he didn't have to. So I used to tell him, man, you're in a whole different time. You can go, I tell kids today, you can go eat anywhere you want to eat. You can travel anywhere you want to travel, anywhere you want to travel. But I tell them, back when your great-grandfather was alive and doing this stuff, it was a different time.
So if I picked up a copy of the Green Book today, would Phyllis Wheatley be in the Green Book?
Yes. Yeah, there weren't very many places. There's actually a couple hotels also, and there's a couple bars, maybe one gas station. So depending upon, because it came out every year, so depends what was listed. And in fact, I was one of the reporters from the Tribune did an article on the Green Book, and so she called me and I said, well, like in St. Paul, you couldn't go into the Lexington. And she called me back and she says, well, I have the Green Book and it says the Lexington is accepted. I said, I don't know what Lexington you're talking about. But you couldn't eat in the Lexington. In fact, one of my friends said he had a buddy and they were asking, do you have a buddy that would like to work? And he said, yeah, I'll bring. So he brought up this guy and the kid was black. And the people said, he can't work here. So, I mean, there's a number of places like that even happened here in St. Paul. And as you said, we're a different time. And we won't talk about the different time we are in today, but we're in a different time. And hopefully we're better than what we were some years ago.
Well, you gotta save this kind of stuff because we have an administration that's trying to make sure this stuff never appears in museums.
Every time I see some of that stuff, I just saw on somewhere else, they took down something about a war vet or something like that. I'm like, man, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of, right? We all bleed the same, right?
But the fear is, giving African Americans a chance, just like they showed in professional baseball, basketball, and football, they may actually be better than you.
Well, I'm going to let you say that. Yes, sir.
In 1981, 19% of Major League Baseball players were black. Last year it was 6%. How come?
I think my first answer to that always is everybody wants to be like Mike. So Nike and the NBA stormed the world. Baseball sat back and kept saying, we're America's game. And they didn't do anything about it. Today, people keep saying, well, baseball is so expensive or whatever. Well, if any of you are familiar with AAU basketball or traveling league basketball, it's not cheap. So, you know, if a kid doesn't have to pay because they can't, that's one thing, but that would happen in baseball too. So the number of kids that are playing, like in our RBI program, between Minneapolis and St. Paul, I would say 10 years ago, we were probably about 19% kids of color, totally, in the whole program of 6,000 kids. However, a lot of kids don't stay with baseball. Baseball is not an easy sport to play. And if you can go play basketball, basketball's not easy, but basketball is a little bit easier than baseball, in my opinion, okay? Even though I like baseball, I don't think there's a better feeling than hitting a baseball flush with a wooden bat. Okay, I don't think there's a better feeling. If you're a golfer and you crush one, you know what I'm talking about. So I think that's part of it, is we just don't, kids, the other part of that is, if you look at parents today that might be in their 30s, maybe their 40s, late 20s, and I hate to say this, so a lot of those individuals grew up trying to be like Mike. If they were athletes, the likelihood of then their kids playing baseball in their home is not very likely. So that's the other piece of that. I mean, they're going to be pushed probably towards playing basketball because dad or mom played that game. And we don't have a lot of people playing baseball. I mean, it's as simple as that, or even they might start, but part of the challenge is, will they continue to play into high school? And and then after high school, it's even less. So the numbers just keep dwindling, unfortunately. So that would be my answer. Now, I don't have the statistics all over the country. I know what they were here because I saw it every week in the RBI program. So that's part of the reason. That's part of the reason. Money might be another factor. All of these traveling league teams, Cub teams, that type of stuff. We have a lot of former athletes that want to be entrepreneurs. And they come out of playing college ball or professional ball, and maybe they want to start a hitting program or a clinic or whatever, or a club program. So they start charging people to play because they know the way, and I'm going to get your kid a scholarship. It's really sad. I wish somebody would develop statistics on some of those kids that don't make it. And not only do you have to pay to play in that program, but if you follow your kid, just the expense to follow your kid in hotels and food and all of that, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And statistically, it doesn't bear out that you're going to make it. And even if you get a scholarship in baseball, in Division I baseball, at the U, I think they have 11.5, 11.6 full scholarships to divide over about 32 players. Nobody's getting a full ride in baseball. So I tell people, if you really want your kid to play baseball, all that money you're spending on a club team, you might want to put that in the bank. You'll have a better scholarship. Now, that's just my opinion. So it's unfortunate. And I don't see a way around it because you have to want to play. You have to put in any sport. But in baseball, You really have to put in time, and you have to get reps and all of that stuff. Kids today pay even to play like in Legion baseball. But if you're not good enough, you're paying and you're sitting on the bench watching. You cannot get better in baseball or any sport if you don't get enough reps. If you're not up swinging the bat and playing, you're not going to be very good, but you're still paying all that money because you want to tell people, oh, I played on the Legion program. Okay, did you play or were you just on the team? If you're trying to get better. But that can be said also about any of our sports today. So, I think. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little about barnstorming?
Sure.
How it got the name and significance of it going?
I can't tell you how the name comes up. I think part of it goes back to circuses and barnstorming, however they took that. But the barnstorming primarily was teams that, even major leagues barnstorm. So people like back then, people weren't getting paid a lot of money. So major league teams, they would put together all-star teams. Negro League teams put all-star teams together, and they would travel around and play. Even teams in the Negro Leagues, you know, they didn't play like a lot of games. So if they were, like a team was, let's just say, St. Louis Stars, if they were playing Chicago or Indianapolis, maybe on their ride to Indianapolis, along the way, they scheduled a couple games in between to pick up some extra money. And if the split was 60-40, you really had to win. I mean, you know, if you're dependent upon how many people are on the team, you better win. The other part of that is when teams travel or did barnstorm, they reduced their roster. They might only take 11, 12 guys for for baseball. Because if you have more players, the amount of money is going to be less, and it's not worth it. I remember one of the guys that played with my father, he said, man, your dad used to take us on them things, and he would only feed us burgers and fries. I'm like, well, my dad's gone. I can't do anything about that. So, I think that barnstorming was a way for sure to fulfill making more money because people just didn't make money. Maybe Babe Ruth made a lot of money, but even if you go after that, there are a lot of the major leaguers didn't really make money like they make today. Today is like absurd. So that barnstorming fulfilled helping people make money after the season or sometimes even during the season. So.
Could you tell small towns have a little activity for that?
It
Went through to, or?
It was really, a lot of teams in these rivalries or bringing in a team was intentionally, again, in terms of the economic impact. Some places, I talked down in southwestern Minnesota one time, and they told me that they used to get, like at their ball field, like 1,000 people to watch a game. I was like, how did they get there? And they said, well, they would horse and buggy or whatever, but they'd get 1,000 people. Well, just think of what that did for that town. People came in, they ate or whatever, they might have spent the night. So baseball was a way to have an economic impact, not only in Minnesota, but across the country.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you all for coming. A couple things. First of all, this was lovely and really excited about what you shared with us.